Into a Tuesday, February 25th edition of Daily Faceoff. Live, Tyler Remchuk, Frank Seravalli with you. And the show, as always, is brought to you by Bet365. Download the app today. Use the promo code NATION. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. We are live on the Daily Faceoff YouTube looking for your hashtag askdfo questions. But Frank, how are you doing here on a Tuesday?
I'm good. Let's go. 10 days until the deadline. Got a Trent Frederic player profile being posted on dailyfaceoff.com momentarily. We'll dive into that in a second. Some Andrew Kopp news this morning for the Detroit Red Wings, going to miss the remainder of this season after undergoing surgery. So we've got some suspensions. We've got some news. It's been busy. Joel Eriksson Ek out for at least a week, missing 4 Wild games. They seem to be cursed. Everything is happening.
The Wild do seem to be cursed. That is a great point. But yeah, we're going to talk about all that. But first, let's start with some of the results from last night. It was a quiet slate on the NHL schedule, but one thing that stands out is those Winnipeg Jets just keep on winning. Now, you might say, why are you talking about a team that had to go to overtime to beat the San Jose Sharks? But Frank, it's their 10th win in a row, and the OT winner was scored by Mark Scheifele, who becomes the franchise's all-time goal-scoring leader. That's the Jets/Thrashers franchise, as you see by some of the other names on this list. But this Jets team has won 10 in a row, Frank. And listen, I remember back in kind of like November, December, when we were like, okay, is this just a team who's riding a hot streak that's coming at a good time? And Connor Hellebuck's obviously unbelievable. But now that we're almost at game 60 and they're still, kind of running away with the West, it's probably time to start considering the Jets a legit Stanley Cup contender.
Yeah, I would put them in that category for sure. I think this year, interestingly enough, has been a little bit different than some years past, or at least it feels different from a Jets perspective. And by the way, I want to throw this at you before we dive more into the Jets Cup contender conversation. But Pat, throw the goal leaders up there again for the Jets franchise. How long until we're having the same conversation about Kyle Connor? Like, I know Scheifele will continue to score and he's got a long-term deal. In fact, Connor will need a new deal this summer, but how long will it take Connor to catch Scheifele?
Well, he's got again, that's a 60-ish goal gap, just over a 60 goal gap. If you're only scoring 15, I guess if you're scoring 15 more goals than Scheifele per season, which I think has kind of been their gap. Actually, it's been a little bit more than that, but probably 3-4 years then I'd say is probably the timeline.
Yeah. Well, point being, Kyle Connor has played way less games in a Jets uniform than Scheifele and is only 60 back. So anyway, just interesting little franchise nugget. But I thought it was really telling and a positive 48 hours for the Jets from the Nemesnikov signing, where he said, this is the place I wanted to be, to Scheifele then on Amazon Prime on Monday night, basically saying, this is an unbelievable place to play hockey, and he's incredibly fortunate to be a Jet and wanted to be a Jet for a long time. So everyone that's there seems to really like it there. It's been hard to keep players once they've traded for them, which brings us to trade deadline. And how big of a swing do the Jets take after a pretty significant trade deadline period last year, bringing in Toffoli, bringing in Sean Monahan? Neither one of those guys stick, and they flame out in the first round. I think the Jets are in the Cup contender circle and conversation, but are facing more pressure than a lot of teams might realize, because they have to break through. It can't just be, we made it and we're good. They've got to do something with it.
Absolutely. And Kevin Cheveldayoff will have a little bit of space and assets to work with. $12.4 million in projected deadline cap space.
$42 million next season. Are you kidding?
Well, and that's where I was going to go. Maybe they're one of these teams that should be looking at the guys on the market with term. We always hear and Seth Jones, I don't think is a fit there. I'm thinking more on the forward front, Frank. But
Seth Jones ain't waving his no trade to go to Winnipeg. I can
and that as well. But that we hear with Seth Jones that okay, how many contenders can fit him in now? Is the market better for him in the summer? But the Jets are one of those teams where if they wanted to go get a high price tag player, they can absolutely afford it at the deadline. And that just gives them some options that, quite frankly, a lot of those other contending teams in the West just don't have. And they also have all of their first round picks for each of the next 3 years. The only pick they're missing in the first 3 rounds of the next 3 drafts is their second rounder this year. So again,
So
if
let
they
me ask
wanted
you
to,
this question another way, though. Given everything that you just said, that they've got space, they've got assets to trade, and they're in contender mode, for a team that went out and made big moves and it didn't help them, should they just stay the course?
I get where you're coming
Like,
with.
why is the conversation with the Capitals where everyone's like, yeah, hey, like we could see that team mostly standing pat, and the Jets, why is it any different? Why are people pounding their fists on the table saying the Jets need to go get guys and the Caps don't?
Because I think the Capital or the Jets have a very clear and defined need at second line center that I'm not sure the Capitals have that defined of a need. I think the
Well,
Capitals, it's more
it's
like,
defined. It's a third line center. It's just a lesser, it's a
yeah,
further down the lineup need.
yeah, and that's fair. I just think, again, the Jets need a second line center. I guess, yeah, the Caps need a third line center, but you can solve that problem with a third round pick and go get whoever, right? I think the Jets, the need's just a little bit higher up in the lineup, so it's more attention, headline
Yeah.
grabbing, maybe.
Just take Brock Nelson and plug him right in.
Yeah.
Perfect sense. Perfect fit.
Let's continue along, Frank. We'll go out east, where again the Red Wings made a couple or had a couple of pieces of news come down over the last 24 hours. You mentioned Andrew Kopp; he is done for the season. It doesn't necessarily mean LTIR space, though. Puckpedia cleared that up. Like, they do have close to $14 million in deadline cap space in Detroit, so they would have to spend all of that before an Andrew Kopp LTIR stint provides them any value. But they're up to $14 million in cap space because they were able to dump Ville Husso yesterday quickly in 30 seconds on that. Why did the Ducks just agree to take that money for nothing?
Well, people don't have the math right. It's less than $1.3 million to close out this season. And the Ducks have not a crisis, but a bit of an issue in San Diego with their goaltending. Callie Klang is out month to month. Oscar Dansk is the only other guy there that they have any form of experience. And the Ducks really want that group in San Diego with the goals to go on a deep playoff run. So they're willing to spend a little bit in order to shore that position up and make that happen. Now, people immediately wanted to draw the line or connect the dot of, oh, if they're bringing in Ville Husso and they're willing to spend this money, then that means that John Gibson's clearly on his way out and Husso's just going to be the backup to close out the year. Not the case and not connected. So I still think a John Gibson trade is a real long shot. Tell me which teams need a goalie. And if you're going to say the Oilers, tell me then how they fit him in.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I'm not going to say that. But just to continue the conversation along the wings, Frank, like, again, we just talked about the Jets. They have the assets and the money if they wanted to make a big splash. And I mean, hey, so does Detroit. As we just said, $14 million in projected deadline cap space. And on top of that, they have each of their picks in each of the first 3 rounds for the next 3 drafts. They have some prospects percolating in the system. Like, if Steve Yzerman wanted to be a guy who takes a big swing. And I know you might sit there and go, hey, a team that's on the wild card bubble, they're barely holding on to a playoff spot right now. Why should they take a big swing? But like, eventually, if you're Detroit, you got to get in. Exactly. You got to get in. So do you think Yzerman takes that swing?
I think they could really use a defenseman. Will they do it and go out and find a difference maker, preferably one that isn't a rental that they could keep for a while? I think that would make a ton of sense. Man, they could really use someone like a Philip Hronek right now. I mean, just think back to some of the pieces that are no longer part of this group. And that, to me, has been the most questionable part of the Steve Yzerman tenure in Detroit, has been talent evaluation on the back end. At every turn, it feels like they've brought in the wrong piece or the wrong guy. And I reported a few weeks ago, Jeff Petrie also out long-term, 6 to 8 weeks after his injury. And so, look, the Red Wings have a ways to go, but they're no different than the Ottawa Senators. They need to get in. They need to give their young players a taste of the postseason. And yeah, missing Kopp certainly doesn't help. But when you look at the way that team is structured down the middle, if you can go Larkin, Comfort, right now they've got Joey Veleno in that third line center role. I don't think they need to go out and do a ton at the forward position, or particularly at center. They've got some of the guys that already were the finishing touches, so to speak, if that makes any sense, Like you re-sign a Patrick Kane, you bring in a Vladimir Tarasenko, even though his name's been out there on the market as sort of those last deadline additions to a team that's competing to make the playoffs. It's on the back end that they desperately need the help. And I do think you're going to see an aggressive Steve Yzerman try and reward his group for the turnaround that they've displayed since Christmas when they made their coaching change on Boxing Day, bringing in Todd McClellan.
I'm assuming that because this Twitter or YouTube user's name is Javi Baez, they're a Detroit Tigers fan, says, could the Wings go get Seth Jones, Frank? Is that the area?
I mean, the fit makes sense. Long term, does it make sense having him kind of plug in as your number 2 defenseman? It would certainly provide more support. And cap wise, we know that Detroit could afford it. Then the next question is, would Seth Jones go to Detroit?
Yeah,
and how interested is Steve Yzerman? There's a lot of pieces to put together in that puzzle.
Let's play a little smoke, fire, false alarm, Frank. I'm going to throw something your way. You're going to tell me it's legit, it's happening, keep an eye on it, or just crumple it up, throw it in the garbage. Usually I go trade rumors on this one, but I want to start somewhere else. Shane Wright's got 3 multi-point games in his last 5 with the Seattle Kraken. He's now up to 34 points on the year. Is Shane Wright blossoming into like a legit top 6 winger here? Do you think it's just a little heater?
Ooh, that's a good question. Legit top 6 winger
or forward
relative to the National League, like the whole National Hockey League. I'd say no, but based on where he was and what the Kraken have in their system, I'd say yes. He's certainly taken a big step forward this season. And I would say that I'm surprised that he's caught Matty Beniers in scoring. How about that?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, and maybe it says more about the state of that Kraken team than anything else. But Shane Wright turning into one of the better stories this season. Now let me throw a trade rumor your way. Brayden Schenn out in St. Louis, 3 more years at $6.5 million. He's got some trade protection as well. But what do you make about the rumblings around Schenn?
I think that trade protection looms large. I think he loves it in St. Louis, has put down roots, has a growing family, is the team captain, is under contract for the next few years. And I think it would take a really special opportunity for him to want to waive the no trade. So I would say smoke, but definitely no fire.
Maybe what about the Jets for him? Coming back up north, played his junior in Brandon?
No chance.
No chance. All right. Let's move along to our deadline countdown article today before we get to our big segment. And Carter
But if you wanted to make a Brandon connection, though, how about Kelly McCrimmon and the Vegas Golden Knights, who was his GM in Brandon? Again, not likely, but I'm saying maybe that's one special connection that you might want to consider. But I don't think they'd be in the market for that anyway.
Yeah, and I think, again, the cap at 6.5, it's certainly not cheap for a guy like Brayden Schenn, whose production's fallen off, a little bit over the last couple of seasons here. Deadline countdown today, Trent Frederic of the Boston Bruins. We talked about the Bruins a little bit yesterday, and that, hey, maybe trending a bit more towards being, call them for sure sellers. But Frederic comes in at number 19 on your trade targets board, Frank. Maybe not the most famous name out there, but a guy who's been sneaky productive in a bottom 6 role for the Boston Bruins the last couple of years. What teams who are looking at Trent Frederic, what are they hoping to get?
A pain in the ass to play against. His physicality is legit and consistent. He is 20th in the NHL this season in hits among all forwards. That number obviously ratchets up when you consider per 60 basis and how many minutes he plays, just under 14. His production has dipped in a pretty significant way. You mentioned the last few seasons. Last year, 18 goals, 40 points. And therein lies the crux and root of why he's not remaining in Boston, is he wants to be paid commensurate to that. And yet this season, his numbers are down. He's probably on track to score about 12 goals this year. The whole Bruins team, their productivity is down. Their goal scoring as a whole is down a half a goal per game. So he's been a victim of that. If you were to acquire him, you also get some optionality. He can play on the wing. He could probably squeeze into a second line winger role in an emergency basis, could play 4th line center too if you needed him, but is probably ideally fit as a 3C. And then when you look at the potential suitors, the teams that could be interested, I mean, the market for 3Cs is relatively robust. Like there's enough teams on this list that are looking at a player like a Trent Frederic that could provide a different element for you. And so the Caps, the theater that would exist, putting Frederic and Tom Wilson on the same team together would be pretty interesting. I don't know how big of an upgrade he is in New Jersey over Eric Hall, a fair question to ask, but I think the Leafs would like a little bit of a different element that Frederic could provide there. Minnesota's always in the market, not necessarily a perfect fit in Edmonton, because they'd be looking for a fourth line right shot center. Frederic's a left shot. But then you look at a team like Vancouver where their center depth has eroded this year, and I say that's a guy that could help, keep you in or get you in the playoff mix. And so he's definitely a force. He uses that 6'3" frame that he has, and he's very likely to be traded between now and next Friday. The question is where and for how much, and kind of pinpointed a second round pick, a late second round pick as a likely option. Lars Eller is the most recent trade comp that I think that fits.
Yeah, and you also had the Orlov Hathaway deal there, where again, if you sort of isolate the assets that had to go out each way, it was kind of like Hathaway for the second round pick in 2025, which was a couple years down the line as well. So you're looking.
So there's the center winger difference, but the physicality, the pain in the ass part of it, I'd say Hathaway is maybe a little bit more of a complete player, but Frederic scores a lot of goals in and around the net, and he also underhandles the puck. 6 of his 8 goals this year, he had exactly 0 stick handles. So he can play in the net front. He can get deflections. He can help out certainly in the lower slot area. And when teams go to low to high meat and potatoes hockey in the playoffs, a guy like Frederic can score. And he did score 3 goals in one 7-game series against the Leafs last spring.
All right, let's move along, get to our big segment for the day. It's brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, where you can get a custom ring built and delivered in less than 4 weeks through the Charm Masterpiece program. You can find more about their lab-grown diamonds and mine diamonds by visiting them online at charmdiamondcenters.com. Carter Hutton, former NHL goaltender, joining us on Daily Faceoff Live to go around the league and talk about some crease situations. And hey, Carter, let's go back to last Thursday. No one's reputation has done a 180 harder than Jordan Binnington's, at least up in Canada after his OT performance. But tying it back into the St. Louis Blues now, if you were the Blues and you have Joel Hofer sitting there and you're looking at these numbers from Jordan Binnington, and all of a sudden there's all this hype around his name, would you maybe look to cash in on that?
Yeah, you never know what Doug Armstrong's thinking, right? He is a guy that is aggressive and going to help out, and especially on a team that is, I think 5 points out of the playoffs at this point. Doesn't really seem like this is the year they're going to get it done. And with all the talk about their captain, Brayden Schenn, being moved, who knows if Binnington is a guy that could get moved out. But the problem for me right now in this market, I know this is usually my time of year near the trade deadline, is there's just not a lot of teams that need guys, right? This is a market where all the teams that are in kind of have their guys, or there's potential of talk being moved, but Jordan Binnington proved he can win in a big segment. Yes, it's a short tournament, but at the same time, if you put him on a good team, he has enough in the moment mental capacity to manage it. And what an impressive performance. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. And I also believe that in St. Louis, Doug Armstrong believes in Dave Alexander, the goalie coach. He did wonders with me. He's done wonders with every guy he's worked with. He brought him to Team Canada to be the goalie coach. I think he believes in him more than he believes in his goalies in a sense. I think Dave Alexander can be the guy to manipulate them and help them and grow them into goalies. So I think Doug Armstrong, kind of holds the keys to the castle here as we move forward.
If you were, like you mentioned, there's just not a lot of teams out there who need goaltending, and I would imagine the price from St. Louis would be high, but is there anyone out there who you look at and like, you know what, if anyone's going to pay the price, it should be them?
You know what? I guess a guy for me, and I don't know where they fit right now, and I know Frank had kind of chatted about John Gibson, but I also just think like he's only 31 years old, and I think when I think of John Gibson, I think he's 35, 36. It feels like he's been in the league forever, so he is a guy that still has a lot of value, right? He's got a .916 save percentage. He's played very well. Again, I just don't know what team is going to go get him, right? There's obviously the talk about Edmonton, but I don't know how they make that work. And the fact of the matter, if it is, it might have to be a whole swap. And when we look at this, the lineup throughout the board, I think Colorado was the team that really needed a guy, and they went out and did a full reno early in the season, adding Wedgwood and Mackenzie Blackwood. So it'll be interesting to see how this year plays out, especially with the limited amount of teams that really need a go-to guy.
Yeah, I'm just not seeing a big goalie market, Huts. And I think the other question that I have for Gibson is what he's done this year sustainable? He's had some really tough years the last few years and then pops up with this 916, 915 this year. Can he repeat that year over year? Is he still that good?
Yeah, Frank, that's the thing for me. I don't know if it's more just because he's in the backup role now, right? Where Dostal has really taken the keys to the castle and he's run with it. So for me, it's the fact of the matter is he still a number one guy, right? And as you start to age 31, I went through this myself. When you kind of get past that 31, it gets harder every day. It seems like, it's more of a grind, especially at the NHL level. But for me, it's the way Gibson manages the game. Like, I think he doesn't move a lot. He lets the game come. So if you were to pluck him into a team that really has a good structure and can defend well, I think there is a lot of optimistic on his game because he doesn't really beat himself, right? He's a guy I would consider like an Aiden Hill. He does Connor Hellebuck, these guys that don't really move a lot. They let the game come to him. So if he was plopped in the right system, I really think he could have a lot of success.
Yeah, just the cap hit and still the term that's in the way of Gibson. So when it comes to the Vancouver Canucks, fascinating move, re-signing Kevin Lankinen, term and dollars he gets, and really a big payoff for him who bet on himself this past summer, going to Vancouver, a spot that needed a spot starter to help them at the beginning of this year, takes the low money deal, wanted more in free agency, and it pays off in a big way. But on the other end of that, what does that mean for Thatcher Demko? And given his injury status, if you were a team out there on the market that's looking for goaltending or maybe doesn't feel great about your goaltending situation, would you take a chance on Thatcher Demko this summer?
I think you'd have to, right? He still is an elite guy. Obviously, I think it just shows the trust that they have right now with Thatcher Demko is very low, right? His injury bug, it's been on him, especially after a summer of rehabbing, still coming back and having the season he's had. I think he needs to evolve, obviously, as an athlete, as a goalie, as he trains. And I think every goalie that ever played in the NHL will tell you it's a revolving cycle, right? You're always trying to evolve and, manage your game. And I think at where I started versus where I finished in my career, just my training and off-season prep and the way that I manage my body throughout a year changed a lot. And Thatcher Demko is a big athletic guy. He can do it all. But obviously, if you're not going to stay healthy, a team is going to move on from you, right? So I think a team would still take a chance on him. And for Kevin Lankinen, like, what a contract. What a guy that believed in himself and bet on it. I didn't necessarily love the deal from that perspective, but he's earned it this year. And you always love to see the smaller guy. He battles, he competes, and he's done a great job there. I also think it goes to show you where they're at with Shilovs as well, right? Obviously, after his playoff run last year, everybody was so high on him. And then you get into a full NHL season and you have to grind, you have to, deal with the ups and downs of a season. And I think for him, he still needs some growth. So it'll be really interesting to see how this plays out, this storyline here in Vancouver.
Just one more on Demko quickly. If he does become available this summer, it's such a high risk, high reward thing. Because on one hand, you could get a guy capable of, ripping off a 920 for a season and playing 45 games. But is he going to play 20 games if he gets hurt, right? What about a team like Pittsburgh? Is that the dumbest idea or the best idea? I feel like they're a team who could stomach the high risk, high reward just where they're at. Like, he plays great, you maybe get in the playoffs. He plays bad, how much worse is it?
Yeah, I think there's a chance there too. And I think like with Tristan Jarry kind of being moved on from there's another guy that when he comes looking for a contract, if you can get him at low dollar, I think there's a lot of value in Tristan Jarry. Just the fact getting out of where you started sometimes is so important for goalies, right? I saw this a lot when I was in St. Louis with Jake Allen. You're kind of the anointed one. And then all of a sudden you're in that market and it doesn't go as planned. Other guys surpass you. And there's a lot of pressure that folds in on, Demko and Jarry, these goalies that have been in that market. They've been drafted to be the next one. So I think there is value in it, but again, it's risk reward, right? And a guy like that, I think teams will take a chance on, but I'm sure they're going to do their due diligence before they get to him.
Man, my brain is exploding just hearing that. Let's say they can't or don't buy out Jarry. All of a sudden, you bring in Demko. You've got $11 million in goalies at some point, if Demko is hurt, that can't play.
Yeah, that obviously that wouldn't work in that sense, right? So it'd have to be something you could move on from. But you're the numbers guy, Frank. I'm just the goalie.
If I were a team like the Flyers, that'd be who I'd be calling on Demko to say, hey, we don't have a goalie. We have nothing up and coming in our system aside from Sam Ersson here. Let's take a flyer on this guy and see if we can, at least rebound from that position perspective and maybe check one of those boxes.
Yeah, and I think there's value there too, right? Especially with Sam Ersson, the way that he played, in that tournament. Yes, he only got one game, but it is a big stage. I think that's got to be assuring for Tortorella watching him, being on the other side of the bench, probably being a little upset that he needs that from him during the regular season. And again, there is just growth and experience, I think, as these guys move on in the NHL. And for Demko, you have to find a way to stay healthy, right? Especially if you're going to be a starting guy and you're going to carry the mail here in the NHL.
What if this knee injury never heals? What if it's just, this is the new normal for Thatcher Demko, and we're all sitting here going, man, that's really tough.
Now, I think, Frank, if I'm dealing with that knee injury, it's probably the end of my career. But when you're Thatcher Demko, you have a little bit more of a leash. I think teams are going to take a little more of a chance on you with his high end, with, how good he can be. But in a sense, I hope him the best moving forward. But it doesn't seem like he's getting ahead of this by any means. I think it's where he really needs a, big chunk of time off, or he's got to re-evolve himself.
Don't be so hard on yourself, Hutz.
You can find Carter Hutton on the Starting Goalies tab over at dailyfaceoff.com with Starting Goalie Show, and next week on our Deadline Show as well. Carter, look forward to that, and thanks for popping on.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Hashtag AskDFO time here on the show. Actually, I want to give some love to a comment here. He's been in the chat a lot. Boring Sean Monahan says, some team should take a Sean Monahan type bet on Thatcher Demko, Frank. And that Sean Monahan.
That's a great comp, yeah.
That deal and that little flip Montreal did is one of my favorite things. And I wanted to direct it back to just this Husso trade from earlier, because there was a really good tweet from Mike Bartner who said Anaheim, with their cap space in the last 3 months, they brought in Trouba and Husso, and all they got were Urho Vakanainen and a 4th-round pick, or that's what they moved on from, I should say. They actually didn't get any assets for it. You compare that to a team in California and San Jose who went and got Jake Wallman and Askarov and Goudreau and all these guys with the money they were just kind of dumping out. It's interesting to see rebuilding teams being able to weaponize their cap space. I feel like it's almost not talked about enough how important that is if you're trying to do that reset.
Yeah, I think it's just two different perspectives. Anaheim, the other teams are looking at it well, we don't get any credits if we don't use our cap space this year, so we might as well use it. And our owner doesn't mind paying, so what's the difference? But you're right. I would be trying to use every cent possible to try and improve my team from a future perspective to get myself out of the muck that I'm in.
Yeah, I mean, you even think about the Canes that one year when they took Patrick Marleau's contract, and did that not become the pick they used to take Seth Jarvis?
Yeah, I mean, you can use, it's use or lose, but
Yeah.
You determine whether you use or lose.
Quickly, let me ask you, what did you make of Ryan Hartman having his suspension reduced? We don't see it that often.
We don't see it that often. I thought that it was interesting that the commissioner, Gary Bettman, kind of picked apart the argument of saying hey, this is it right here. He didn't agree that the NHLPA and the formulaic methodology that was presented, but that kind of stacking up the increased penalty and punishment for suspension for Hartman based on his previous transgressions, he felt that it was excessive, and the quote quantum of increase should be reduced. So that was kind of the money part of the argument that the NHLPA made. And now that it's been reduced, the key is from 10 to 8 games, is that Hartman will not appeal any further to a neutral arbitrator, which would then lengthen the process, of course. However, this is also a unique moment in time because look how long it took to hear this. We had all kind of moved on, right? Had the Four Nations face-off break not been here, Hartman would not have gotten any games back and would have potentially just gotten money back. So kind of fortuitous if you're Hartman and the timing of it, in that you're able to save yourself some games.
I do not have a high enough level of education to understand quantum of increase, but we'll just move on from that. Our daily bets brought to you by Bet365. Download the app today. Use the promo code NATION, whatever the moment. It's never ordinary at Bet365. 2 picks for you tonight. I like the Leafs on the puck line. They've won 2 in a row, 6-4 in their last 10, but playing good hockey coming out of the break. And this Bruins team, as we've talked about a bunch, they are banged up. No McAvoy, no Lindholm on the blue line. I like the Leafs offense to get rolling. And then shot prop, Alex Ovechkin. He's hit this in 3 straight, both games coming out of the break, and you're getting plus money on it. Again, as he inches closer to that record, he is just going to keep on shooting and shooting and shooting. Frank, I watched their game against the Penguins the other day. He took a 4-minute and 36-second shift because they were on the power play for that long, did not come off the ice once. And even though they're up 7-3, 9 shot attempts for Ovi in 4.5 minutes, just funneling everything at the net. So I like betting on him.
Love it. He's going to be a man on a mission.
Again, to wrap up the show with garbage time, we've talked so much, Frank, about growing the game and how big the Four Nations face-off is. Thought it was great to see Matt Tkachuk on the Jimmy Fallon show. Let's take a little listen.
When you won the Stanley Cup, there was a shot of your dad. I just want to show everyone. Here's a picture of your dad at Game 7. He got emotional there.
Yeah.
Proud dad.
I think that's the only time I've ever seen him cry.
Yeah. And now I'm showing it on national television again.
And then my brother was crying there too, which I haven't seen him cry since playing mini sticks in the basement and throwing them through the walls.
Yeah.
It's
must have been a lot of holes in the wall when growing up.
There were a lot. That was Mom was not too happy with that. So
No.
Then we had to
Frank, I mean, again, as a Canadian fan who roots for the Edmonton Oilers, I have no reason to like Matt Tkachuk, but he is the perfect face of the league star for the USA.
Both of them are, Matthew and Brady, and I think are now household names among even non-casual fans. Also, the story kind of brought me back to my own childhood because I remember me and my brother used to fiercely play mini sticks in the basement, and we had multiple holes. But what I did was you'd go to the pro shop or something and, hey, Dad, can I get a poster of Eric Lindros or something? I would just take the poster and cover up the holes. And it wasn't until we were moving that my parents then removed the posters and were like, what is this? And just absolutely lost their minds as they had to get all these walls repaired. And so I was able to kind of cover it up for a while. I don't know if that was smart or dumb, but so I can relate to the Tkachuks and great. They're just genuine. Everything that they, play for and how they, go about it and their personalities, like there's nothing is, sort of fakely presented, so to speak. So I think that part also rings true and resonates with fans.
Yeah, seem very genuine. Good faces of the league. That'll be a wrap on today's edition of the show. Tomorrow, of course, more trade talk with the Deadline Countdown article, and Stephen Ellis will swing by for his weekly appearance on the show. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content here at Daily Faceoff, like Morning Cup of Hockey with Johnny Lazarus and Colby Cohn. But that's a wrap for us today. We'll be back tomorrow at noon Eastern. See you then. What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you're going to want to hit the subscribe button to not miss any of our content. From daily live shows with Frank Seravalli to analysis from former NHLers to exclusive interviews with some of the biggest names in the hockey world on Frankly Speaking. You're going to want to hit that subscribe button and stay up to date with everything going on in the hockey world.